Welcome to the episode of Beyond Coaching. Excited for a pretty unique episode today. I have two of my friends from Friends University with me today, Dr. Wendy Moeller-Sieb and Kelli Seiwert, a recent grad, I believe, of Friends University. Walked across the stage last weekend. So y'all have been doing some research on the athletes at Friends, and we're going to dive into that. But first, if you could both give us a kind of a 30-second snippet about who you are and your background. And Wendy, don't forget to mention your prowess as a college golfer in your introduction. So Kelli, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Hello, my name's Kelli Seiwert, and I grew up here in Wichita, Kansas. And yes, I did just walk across the stage 2 days ago at graduation. So that has been super exciting. And my time at Friends was just great. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in Christian formation and ministry, and then an associate's in psychology. So very excited to see where that goes. And then I also played basketball for my first 2 years here and was super involved in a lot of other areas.
Doctor?
Yes, I'm a professor here at Friends University. I teach in our Christian Formation and Ministry program as the assistant professor of theology. I am a graduate of Southwestern College down the road and played on the first women's golf team in 1999 through 2001. I was on our first team and we went to nationals my senior year. And I think we placed 16th back in the day. So we're excited to be here. I love working with student athletes and have really loved thinking critically with both you, Rob, and Kelli about what it looks like to form student athletes in the image of Christ.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. So I'm curious what drew you to the research where you're exploring the intersection of faith and sport, essentially, and the theology of the body. What took you to that place of wanting to do the research?
So Wendy reached out to me about a year ago from today, and um, I had her for a few classes at this point and just asked me if I'd be willing to start this research with her. And from a little bit of my why is I had that intersection of college athletics within studying Christian formation. And so I myself was experiencing some tension between, oh, here I am pursuing my athletic career, but then also I'm growing spiritually. So, how do these two intersect and how do they fit, especially in the context of my body and how I'm treating it and how God created it?
Good.
So my background's in youth ministry. My area of expertise is youth ministry, and I think there's a constant tension that the church finds with youth and sports. There's both a tension and a beauty that we recognize in it. And I have really worked hard. I think one of the things I'm not interested in doing is demonizing sports, like from the church's perspective. I don't want to swing the pendulum any direction too far, I think is the quest I'm always on, is how do we find some sort of space that says yes and instead of no but, and so I think for me, like, I love athletics. I love watching the Chiefs. Have been a KU basketball fan my whole life. Our family grew up with season tickets to watch the community college basketball team. And so sports have always been a big part of community and belonging, and then thinking critically about how our young people formed is been my whole drive over the last 25 years of my career, is to ask, like, the first question that really started for me is this question of what keeps young people in the church and what causes some to walk away. Like, why do some remain really committed to their faith and why do others seem to veer? And then more recently, as the sports culture has shifted in the 25 years of youth ministry that I've done, the question of how do sports intersect into that space of continuing in the faith journey, and how do sports cause families to either stop going to church or it becomes, some form of idolatry, which I recognize may be inflammatory to say.
I think,
But
I think it's
I
right
think it's
on.
probably
I think
I
that's
think it's
fair.
accurate.
Yeah.
So that's my
Well,
interest in the subject.
yeah. And I think that's fair of becomes an idol or even a god for a lot of people. And I don't know, in my work now at Friends, we're we're working the older age, but I got my young kids, where the oldest is 5th grade, starting to get into sports. I I think sport, unless it's done very intentionally, can do more harm than good, and I think this kind of work is really important. So, well, tell us about what you studied.
Okay, so we started with a set of questions that we ask on the Likert scale. So from a scale from 1 to 5, like strongly disagree to strongly agree, just ask as many student athletes as would respond to our survey here at Friends. Uh, Different questions about their understanding of the body, the understanding of the goodness of their body. Did they recognize their body as the dwelling place of God's Spirit? And we were particularly curious here at a Christian university, where we talk about our faith explicitly, and the Christian mission is so deeply embedded in who we are here at Friends. So we ask questions about how the students treat their body, how the environment shapes their understandings of their body, those kinds of things. So we had 144 student athletes respond to that survey. We were able to keep 128. Some of them just didn't put the information in that said that they were signing off, on being a part of a research group. And then we conducted 16 interviews with student athletes, asking them some of the same questions. It started with something as simple as, does being a college athlete at Friends University encourage or discourage you from following Jesus? Just very simple.
Mhm.
And we were really pleased because we had students ranging from atheist to agnostic, Christian to like nominally Christian or culturally Christian. And I feel like I know that we got like statistically solid responses from that we can say there's some statistically significant data from our research.
Define that for idiots like me. Statistically significant, meaning it's transferable across the population at Friends?
Yes, and meaning that it's verifiable data with numbers, and I don't, truth be told, I don't fully understand how the statistics all work. We have a colleague here at Friends who has done all of that work for us to verify that we can actually, verify that we had a large enough population of students, so we can actually say this is the case, and it's not just our hunches and what we believe, but the data and the numbers actually verify it by having enough responses from a variety of students from different athletic fields. So
So not that
you probably actually can talk about stats better than me.
not to out myself, I faked my way through quantitative statistics. So
Yeah, I'm a theologian. I don't know.
so I'm gonna ask 2 questions and feel free to answer either one. So really looking high level at your research, and one of our target audiences with this work and everything Dustin and I are doing, the Impactful Coaching Project, is the young coaches we were once. What are some actionable, realistic things we can give them to do? So, and help them grow in their process. So, of everything you studied, everything you learned, um, what's one thing for a coach to take away from it in terms of their responsibility? And then just in general, what about the student athlete? What's the connection to faith and how do they see it? So takeaway for a coach, and then help us understand student athletes and faith better.
Yeah, so I think, through our conversation of just analyzing a lot of the data, Wendy and I talked a lot about for coaches, for them to have a clear vision of how they want their team to look like, their team culture, the expectations that they have, whether it's how they treat each other or how they're carrying themselves on the court or field. Having a clear vision of what you want that to look like is very important, because if the coach themselves cannot display what they want to see in their athletes, then their athletes are not going to feel as encouraged to do so. So we see that as a really big part of, if they want to create this Christian culture, then they definitely need to lead by that example. And from the get-go, preface, here's how I want to lead my team, and I'd love for you to be a part of it, but here's some of the things that we abide by. And I think we saw how formative this is, because we can see across our data within different teams just how encouraged or discouraged athletes feel to follow Jesus, or just live in a Christian like context, because coaches do it all differently, and they're all created differently, so that's definitely an aspect. But for each coach to have their own vision, I would say is very important. And then within the student athletes, we can definitely commend the university of creating a culture that encourages athletes to follow Jesus, because that was some of the data we received back. And so we can say that athletes have the opportunity and they feel encouraged to follow Jesus, not only through their athletics, but just through their time at the university. And some of our other questions did articulate that they know their body is important. And as a former athlete, like, I know college athletes know how to take care of their body well. But where we saw that disconnect was between connecting the two of athletes not only taking care of their bodies well because of this moral responsibility they feel to performing to their coaches
Mhm.
and to their team, but also their responsibility as being God's creation and taking care of their body and soul, which is tied together as one and something you can't separate.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what I would add is the word belonging to what Kelly said about coaching. Like, we know that young adult development, like, this is a time in their lives where belonging is of high importance. If we think Eric Erickson still has any value, the question the young adult asks is, to whom or what will I pledge my fidelity? And so I think college athletics and high school athletics, even I would say, and really middle school athletics, these are places where belonging is so important. Over and over, we found that if the student didn't feel like they belonged on the team, there was a negative association. But if they felt they belonged on the team, there was a positive association to their own faith formation based on a sense of belonging. So figuring out, how do you create a culture of belonging for the student who may never actually see any playing time, or who will see some playing time, but it will be minimal, but their role on the team is vital in terms of encouragement and culture and practice and all of those elements that the student who's not the standout, the student athlete who's not the standout still brings value to the team, and making sure that there's a place of deep belonging. The other piece I would add, do you wanna jump in?
Yeah, let me
Did you
ask
have a
a question
thought?
on that. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
belonging piece, totally agree. Did anything jump out at you of what coaches were doing or not doing that either encouraged or I don't think discouraged belonging is probably the right word, but the other end of that spectrum?
I think when coaches wouldn't step in and kinda get in where it was messy, where there's
Mhm.
some drama going on, and kind of shut the drama down, and if a coach was conflict avoidant when it became time for relational, if you're conflict avoidant related to, interpersonal relationships of a group of student athletes, uh, the absence of conflict creates conflict.
Yes.
So to avoid the conflict actually will create more conflict because your team is going to try to figure that out with or without you. The conflict won't go away if you don't insert yourself. So I think where
Well said.
the coach was willing to take it head on and say, Listen, we have a conflict as a team, and these are some things that aren't tolerated here." And just those clear boundaries of this is what it looks like to create a space where everyone belongs and is of value and worth.
Cool. Sorry, go on now.
Okay. I think the other thing I would say for the coach is transferable skills. So this actually, I did a study with a professor down at Southwestern on leadership formation and how leaders are formed. And I think we all know experientially that, like, just because you're a great player, it doesn't make you a great
Mhm.
coach. Just because you're a great teacher, it doesn't make you a great principal. Just because, I mean, we could go on and on
Yep,
with
right on.
those kinds of analogies, right? So the key is the coach teaching transferable skills and explicitly stating how those skills transfer on and off the field. I mean, we repeatedly heard this from the football players we interviewed. They just were very clear that what they were doing on the football field was important in how they were going to live their lives one day. So I'm going to be good to my team, and by being good to my team and being among the brotherhood and honoring the brothers on the football team, I'm learning how to be a good community member. I'm learning how to be a good father in my home. I'm learning how to lead well in work. So I think that goes with faith too. It's the beauty of, I think, what FCA has to offer is a space where the translation is happening, really beautifully, which I think is really where my encouragement would be for the student athlete is to go to those places like Fellowship of Christian Athletes where you have space to explicitly talk about how your faith is shaped by your athletics and how your athletics are shaped by your faith. And then they don't have to see them, so separate.
Mhm. Was there any part of what y'all found that surprised you? You are this generation, Kelly, so I'm really interested if you were surprised by it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, there were a lot of things, and part some of my favorite parts was just me and Wendy sitting in her office for hours just talking about everything that we're seeing and based off our experience, based off the data, like, oh, those conversations were just great, and they could have never ended. Um, I think one of the things that surprised us or that really struck me um, was a specific interview that Wendy had with someone, and, um, they were talking about just why athletes take care of their bodies and so on, and the student looked at Wendy and just said, "I wish that my coach would look at me more as a person and less as a performer." And I think that's something that I'll carry with me throughout, my days, just learning from this research of it surprised me how much of that responsibility athletes feel to perform rather than performing out of it could even be the joy of the sport. I know there's a lot of athletes that love their sport, but that pressure is definitely there and it's real, which is a great thing about athletics that can teach you how to work with that pressure in life when it comes. Um, but both going into this research, we both saw that there would probably be this disconnect of connecting their well-being to the holiness of their body.
Mhm.
Um, so in a way, we kind of saw that coming, but what we didn't see was just how strongly they felt to be encouraged, like, to follow Jesus and how strongly they realize that their bodies do matter, but just that disconnect, it's so hard to articulate because it's just so dynamic between team and person and athlete,
Mhm.
but that's one thing that surprised us is just how difficult that line is to draw.
One worry I have in my role as AD is there's so much preached in a good way on sacrifice for the team. And I think that's a value of learning to be on a team community, and you may not have the role you want, but at times that can transfer over to putting your playing hurt or whatever it may be. And there's been times where I think kids feel pressure to please their coach and play when they can make an injury infinitely worse.
Mhm.
And I think, and I may be wrong, that's more self-imposed by the student, and the coach would rather him not play. But um, what do you see in your research? Is that a fair concern that I have, or yeah, just kind of give me a response to that statement.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement of that's one of the specific questions we ask them is, do they feel pressure to continue on when their body has hit their limit, whether that's an injury or something else? And I was personally surprised by those results because most said that they did feel encouraged to step back, but any athletes I would have talked to personally through my career, anybody is pushing through. I saw multiple of my teammates push through these injuries where, they're taking so much ibuprofen before the game just to make it through.
Mhm.
Um, which some of that I understand because you love the game and you wanna play and you want to compete.
Mhm.
But also, one of our questions going in is there a line where you're going too far?
Mhm.
And it brings me back to what Wendy said about belonging because, um, I was injured my first year that I played. I tore my ACL, and that was really a journey to see the team from a different perspective of being injured and what that looks like to belong on a team in that sense. And we've heard great stories of coaches who have helped athletes who are injured feel a part of the team, and we've heard horror stories of coaches who have just disregarded an injured athlete, and
Mhm.
I personally think there's a lot of gold in a lot of ways that injured athletes can be attended to differently there.
Mhm.
Yeah. How so? Can one of you go into that of I'm a pick a sport, and I have players hurt every year, and I feel uncomfortable on how to ask them to do things without being overbearing. How would you integrate them in?
I think one of the pieces is just that, when you're injured and you're going to the training room all the time, it isn't work.
Mhm.
It's time. The amount of time some of our student athletes, I think back to the earlier question about surprising us. I think the scheduling piece surprised me 20 years later, however long it's been since 2021 when I finished college athletics, is, now students are playing all year round. So we actually had a break. We had an off season,
Mhm.
and we didn't have indoor places to go hit golf balls, and so I think that lends itself a little bit to more injuries, and some of that is documented. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I know enough about, like, Tommy John's surgery to know, um, just the amount of play that students are in. So then I think the attending to is it's the coach creating opportunities and encouraging the players to not to forget, because I think some of the deep pain I heard was how disposable they felt with their teammates.
Mhm.
So suddenly they're missing out on these major social moments. Practice is a social event as much as it's practice. It's a place of bonding, and you're grinding through this drill together and you're complaining about coach together, and those things cause you to bond, right? Because can you believe we had to run that much more today than we did yesterday? My legs are already so tired. So I don't know, because of the time piece, I think it becomes really challenging. How do you invite them into other spaces? But I think this is where, on a Christian campus, it's great opportunity for campus ministry to step in. What would it look like for coaches to say to the campus ministry team or the students on campus that serve in ministry, would you be willing to do a Bible study, or would you do a listening group for students? Because there's so many questions of identity that start to emerge when a student athlete is injured, particularly if it takes them out of their sport. And I think the more they can hear stories and testimonies and encouragement from one another, there's real beauty on the other side. And I guess I would just insert, this isn't from the research, this is from teaching the good life. So I have two students this semester who chose to leave athletics while here at Friends, and one who was severely injured. Um, and their stories changed the conversation in our good life class because they were willing to talk about openly, their own identity journey as they stepped away. So I think spaces where the stories can be told, the questions can be raised, the question of, who am I apart from being a football player? Who am I now that I don't have my sport? I've only known myself as Wendy the golfer.
Yeah.
So who am I now that my first job out of college, I didn't make enough money to play golf. So so who am I without my golf team and without free golf balls and free time on the range? And thankfully, I had a campus minister ask me that the semester before I graduated, and we spent time processing that. So I think there's room in injury for those kinds of conversations too. That was kind of a long answer to get
No,
to really.
that's good.
Yeah, I have 2 things I would add to that, just, applicable ways that coaches can attend to their injured athletes, and I would say the first one is to continue to include your athletes as much as possible within practices. Because I really, although I didn't like it at the time because I just wanted to go, do my physical therapy and sit in the corner, but my coach made me help just passing the ball in drills where I didn't have to move, I could stay in one spot, and I appreciate that more today than I did in that moment. But keeping your athletes as involved in as possible, safely, of course, can be a big way to help them still feel included. And then I think this goes back to, again, the belonging piece of if there's a more important time to look at your athlete, not as your athlete and as a performer, but more as a person. It's gonna be that moment in time when they're injured because there's a huge, like Wendy said, identity crisis, you could say, that an athlete goes through just because of the weight that athletics carries and the time
Mhm.
commitment it is. I personally experienced that myself, and there were times where I wished my teammates or coaches would take a second to just check in and see how I'm doing, not only with my physical therapy, but just as a person, because that's honestly where I was struggling more.
I think that other piece of this that, I hadn't really thought about in the research, but as we're talking comes to mind is so many students are so aware of how much energy, time, effort, money their parents have given to getting them where they are. And they do not want to disappoint mom and dad. They do not wanna let mom and dad's dream, go. So even at the college level, I wonder, how do we help encourage parents when the student athlete may be ready to hang up
Mhm.
the hat, and their body hurts in a way that it didn't hurt at 16, and they're only 20. I mean, how do we help them navigate their deep appreciation for what their parents have done for them, which I think is so honorable, and also help the parent let go of their grief because it's not just the grief of the student athlete, but they're carrying the grief of their parents with them too, many of them.
Yeah, I have a statement and then a question. We've talked about this before, and I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast, but we've been studying as an athletic department motivation. And one year we asked every student athlete, and it was kind of research approved by the university, anonymous, like what motivates you to participate in your sport. And relationships was the top thing. In order of value was not value, in number of responses was teammates, and then number two was family. And then number
Mhm,
three was the coach, which really surprised me. But I think
mhm,
we're talking about the student athlete identity. I think it's broader. You're kinda getting there, Wendy. It's a family
mm,
identity.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so my question is, and I'm going off script here, um, how do we take this on when the family starts into sports or during the high school years so we don't have this massive identity issue of when sports is over? I think it's a probably not overstating it, a crisis for some people. What do you have any thoughts
mhm,
on how we get ahead of it?
Hmm. I think bringing the conversation up, like you said earlier in those high school years of whether it's a coach or a coach who is a parent also, of taking the time to affirm this youth in their athletics as more of a performer. Sorry, less as a
Mhm.
performer, more as a person. I just keep going back to that line because I think it's just so true. And connecting this back to our research in a Christian context, it could be specifically affirming them as God created you as body and soul and a unity as one. And as an athlete, like that is one of the ways that you are expressed as a person, but also you need to take care of yourself because your soul matters as well. And one of the questions we thought of in conversation is what is gonna motivate athletes after they are done with their college career in athletics to take care of their body well? Because if their motivation is mainly for their coach or for their teammates, they may not have that afterwards, but if they know that there's an importance of taking care of your body because God created you as holy, that could be more of that motivational piece for later
mhm.
on.
I also think, I mean, I really believe in the life of the church. We have to be within the life of the church, we have to be committed to communal practices and a communal way of life because it's too hard to combat some of the assumptions. Like, I would love for the church to find herself in a more prophetic place where she is questioning some of the cultural assumptions around us. So, one of the cultural assumptions is your student can only become a college athlete if they participate year round in XYZ sport and they're on the elite traveling team and y and they, spend every weekend and playing their sport and they specialize. And actually, let's question the assumptions. And people are doing it, but we're not acting on it necessarily. I heard the Iowa State or Iowa, I think it was the Iowa women's coach saying how much she would rather have a three-sport athlete than a specialized athlete. Well, why? Because they're more developed, they're more robust, and their muscles have been utilized in different ways, and things from soccer can translate into basketball, all these things. Well, I would argue from the way that God has created us, we're more than athletes too. Like, God created us as artists. And so, I think for me, one of the things that I feel sadness for young people is I was this kind of Renaissance kid. I started out at a community college on a theater scholarship. I played on the men's golf team in high school because we didn't have a men's golf team. So when they started a women's golf team, I was like, well, theater, you were fun. And now I'm headed to golf because I have never had the chance to play on a women's team, and I cannot wait for this opportunity. And so I think one of the cultural assumptions is this: how do we question the fear culture around us and trust our kids and trust that they're they're broader and there's life beyond athletics. And I think we can only do that in community, because otherwise, if I'm in like my little world and I've got this myopic vision of what life looks like, and I'm mediating all of it through social media posts or watching professional athletes, then I think, well, if my kid's not an athlete, they actually won't have any value. Well, that's completely untrue.
Mhm.
But I can only come out of that space with a community of faith who helps me question the assumptions.
Yeah, and those assumptions are being driven by big business too. There's a lot of, um, yeah, a lot of business.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines is to say, you can pay as much money as you want for I mean, anybody who pays enough money can have an elite athlete.
Yep.
This is a business venture.
Yes.
Someone's making a whole lot of money off of the bodies of small children.
Mhm.
And there was a time we thought this was like a form of slavery, actually, to make so much money off of bodies who have no voice or power over how much they're used. And I think we have to critically assess some of that.
Yeah. And over sport's a great thing, but when you break it down and try to describe to an alien what basketball or golf is, it sounds pretty ridiculous. Yeah. So, yeah, it's how do we do this well? Um, I had one more question. That might be a good jumping off point. Any final thoughts that you'd wanna share?
I think one of the pieces that I loved so much from one of the interviews was a young woman who was coached by our golf coach, our women's golf coach, who passed away unexpectedly in the fall. And I feel like he really captured the essence of this idea of recognizing the student athlete as a person. And she said of all of the coaches that recruited her, he was the first person to ask her, "What do you do for fun outside of golf?" And then when she was injured, he said to her, and she was debating whether she played on an injured shoulder or not. He said, in 10 years, I want you to be able to pick your child up. And if playing on this injured arm is going to prevent you from being able to lift up your child, then it's not worth it. So I think coaches have so much voice in the life of students and student athletes, and I think they know that. I think there's a degree to which we all know, if we've thought about it, that those of us who work with young people, we wield great power and great responsibility. And so I think these moments that we've captured, I think the beautiful moments of athletics is really, what kind of person have you created and invested in? Who are they becoming is more important than what they accomplish.
Well said. That's a good soundbite right there too at the end. Um, Kelly, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, just a note of encouragement to coaches, that one thing that I learned from this whole process is just how difficult all of this is, and how it can be just so diverse for every coach. And so just encouragement to take the time to really envision the coach that you want to be and the type of team that you would like to have, not only on the performance level, but just as like God has entrusted all of these athletes to your care for this specific moment in their life. And how do you want to influence them? How do you want to inspire them in this time that you're gifted with these athletes, whether that's, pushing them past the limits they thought were possible. One of the great things about athletics, or teaching them that rest is okay as well, and that they matter as a person, more than who you see them as an athlete.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much both for joining me, but the work you're doing, I think it matters a lot. And one thing I kept thinking as we're going through it is just that it gets more complex the more you talk about it in some ways, and we need to be able to lean into it.
Yeah, there's nothing easy. I think so many people are trying so hard to do so well. I think we saw that again and again. So I hope any encouragement or critiques we bring are heard under the lens of deep recognition and respect for how hard so many are working to be positive in the field and are in it for the right reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll wrap up there. Thanks so much, and looking forward to having you on in a year or two. And
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Beyond Coaching is a podcast developed and produced by the Impactful Coaching Project with the support of Friends University. The Impactful Coaching Project seeks to develop coaches that coach the whole person and is the thought leader in coaching the 21st century athlete. The Impactful Coaching Project produces training, information, and research to help coaches improve. To see more information, go to impactfulcoachingproject.substack.com. Thank you.